Well, it's clear that the 80% probably of all monetary crime is related to drugs. People either selling drugs, buying drugs, or robbing to feed their drug habit.
On the basis of some research that we did in Mountjoy in 86 and 96, we discovered that 6 tiny little areas in Dublin City supplied 75% of all Dublin-born people to Mountjoy prison.
When you feel marginalised, then the option of using drugs to make you feel good or to make life seem more attractive is very strong.
We've had a lot of discussion about the issue of decriminalisation over the last couple of years, and it's coming from a place where people see either their own family members, drug users themselves, people in the community who, because of their involvement in drug use, now have a criminal record, and that has a negative impact on their lives in all kinds of ways.
It's partly to do with the criminalisation of drug misuse. A young person, 20-year-old, in the inner city is far more likely to be stopped and searched by the Gardaí than a 20-year-old living in Foxrock. I think there is a form of almost institutionalised racism within the justice system. I think the Gardaí see their role in Foxrock and Mount Merrion as preventing the residents from becoming the victims of crime. I think some Gardaí in areas like Ballymun in the inner city see their role as preventing the residents from committing crime.
In the last 10 years, as the drug difficulties and the drug issue spread around the country, the other, not surprising thing is that where are they rooted? In every town and village in the country, in the most socially disadvantaged areas. So we know now from experience that social disadvantage and alienation, social alienation, attracts drugs.
A serious drug user might be committing 2 crimes a day to feed their drug habit. If they're on a waiting list for 12 months to get drug treatment, that is over 700 crimes going to be committed because our society has not invested in drug treatment for that person in a timely fashion.
So we are finding now that people generally feel you shouldn't make a criminal out of someone for using drugs. Again, if we're looking at this in sort of the broader context of communities that are disadvantaged and all the issues related to that, to turn young people in those areas into criminals because they use drugs definitely doesn't make sense.
We have spent over the last 20 years billions of euros trying to control the supply of drugs, and the end result is that more and more different drugs are available in Ireland now today. So clearly I think we have to say the war on drugs has long since been lost, but we have our heads in the sand and we're not prepared to admit that.
The last number of years, the last 5 years of my time, that would be from around 2005-06 onwards, there was a massive increase in the levels of violence. And many people who normally use drugs but were under no pressure outside of the addiction itself, but now they were coping with the addiction and also with the fear and the threats that were over them in relation to own money and not being able to pay up. So the culture became very violent and very destructive.
The issue of intimidation, it affects drug users, it affects their families, it affects the whole community, because again you can see it in the way in communities now, people a lot of the time they go around with their heads down, their eyes averted, because you don't want to see things, because you're afraid of seeing things because it might have implications for you. So across the community it's a huge problem, but obviously particularly for drug users and their families, around drug related debt, intimidation is a huge issue.
The public often, the general public don't realise that for very small sums of money, 200 or 300 euro, your life can be at risk. You can be very seriously beaten up. You can be under very serious threats.
There are specific things which particularly the Family Support Network has been involved in, working in partnership with the Gardaí to set up an intimidation reporting system which is confidential. Obviously the confidentiality been hugely important to people, so that it's there as a specific response. But in the end of the day, obviously we do have to look at how, I suppose, the drug market and the fact it's illegal has led to the levels of violence that we see.
If we can help one drug user to overcome their misuse of drugs, You prevent a huge number of crimes being committed. You prevent that person going into prison at enormous expense to the taxpayer, maybe on a number of occasions. You prevent that person being admitted to hospital for drug-related issues. So every one drug user who comes off drugs, there's an enormous benefit to society, to the whole of society. The problem is you can't see something not happening.
The projects that are currently working on the ground, they're kind of holding the line at the moment. They're keeping things from getting really bad. So we need the resources that have been taken from them restored. We need a recognition of the really valuable work they're doing. Again, we know if drug users go into rehabilitation, for example, the money that's going to save the state in terms of the costs, in terms of health, crime, all of those things. So it doesn't even make sense from a financial point of view to be cutting those projects. Projects on the ground in communities. It's not just the work they do with the drug users and the families, it's the impact on the whole community, and that it gives them a sense, well, maybe we can do something about this, maybe it's not hopeless.
We know from studies of community action against drug that drug dealing is challenged. We know that there is better cooperation between these communities and the Gardaí, the police. We know that people stay in treatment much longer. We know that there are health gains for people who either have been in treatment or, more importantly, their families. We know that families get additional support and help in helping their loved ones through a drug problem or a drug issue. We've seen estimates, for example, that the gains for every €1 that goes into a disadvantaged community that has a drugs problem, that there is a gain of up to €9 back from that. These are not my findings, they're findings of independent agencies that really are above scrutiny.
We need to provide treatment on demand. I think that's the most important thing. And indeed, in the midterm review of the previous National Drug Strategy in 2005, one of the recommendations is that people would have access to treatment within 4 weeks of being assessed. Now that never happened. You can be waiting months and months and months to get into treatment. So I think the most important thing is to have a variety of different treatment options available for people almost on demand.
But in the end of the day, as has been acknowledged by this state going back to the 90s, we will not deal long term with the drugs crisis in our communities unless we see it linked to disadvantage and unless we look at bigger investment in our communities, addressing those issues around housing, around education, around family support. You said it in the 80s, you said it in the 90s, you said it in 2000. Our drugs crisis will only be addressed if we invest in disadvantaged communities.